All right. Hello, everybody. Yes, I'm finally here on time. I am awake. I have my beverages ready for me. So, yeah, I'm still a little weirded out that I can see the sun now, but whatever. I'll get used to it. Can't wait for the weather to finally warm up. All right. So, you guys voted. And so today we are going to talk about the one, the only Jack Kirby. So, if you have not heard of Jack Kirby, how are you in comics and you don't know about Jack Kirby? But anyways, Jack Kirby was a very famous comic artist who was basically one of the main tent poles that got Marvel started way back in the day. And he's just created so much comic stuff that we still return to and we still remake all the time. And it's kind of insane how much he created in his lifetime. So we're going to start with Wikipedia, as always. And I was thinking we could find more print interviews, but I found this one interview that was really, 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 really long. And I also found a couple more, fun tidbit interviews for us to go over today, and possibly a few. Alan Moore is making another appearance in a video that is not about him. But I forgot how long this was. Anyways, so we shall start with Wikipedia, and then we'll go into the videos. So, if you probably are looking at the last name Kirby and thinking, that sounds like a very interesting last name, that's because it was not his original last name. He was born a Jacob Kurtzenberg, which... Alright, yep. August 28th, 1917, and unfortunately passed February 6th, 1994. That is almost 1 year from before I was born. Yeah. Widely regarded as one of the medium's major innovators and one of his most prolific and one of its most prolific and influential creators. He grew up in New York City and learned to draw cartoon figures by tracing characters from comic strips and editorial cartoons. I remember doing that as a kid in art class because I was too lazy to learn how to draw myself, so I just traced. He entered the nascent comics industry in the 1930s, drawing various comic features under different pen names, including Jack Curtis. Before settling on Jack Kirby. I wonder why he changed his name. I mean, I know I made a sound for Kurtzenberg, but I mean, that's a perfectly fine last name. I wonder why he changed it to Kirby. Is it because it sounded better to him? I don't know. Alright, in 1940, he and writer-editor Joe Simon created the highly successful superhero character Captain America for Timely Comics, predecessor for Marvel Comics. And if you're looking at that being like, wait, I thought it was Atlas Comics first. I thought it was a whole bunch of... There were a lot of different comic companies that were fused together to make Marvel. This was very much a thing back then. And still kind of a thing now. Well, not now, but I do know that both Marvel and DC picked up a lot of imprints over the decades, including... when I believe it was, I'm gonna make a correction from last week's stream. I said that Charleston Comics was absorbed by Marvel, and that's not correct. If I remember correctly, DC was the one who got it. Yeah, because Blue Beetle was part of the Charleston Comics originally, and they got absorbed into the DC canon. Because before the whole Crisis on Infinite Earth things, they had all different Earths, and the Charleston Comics was their own little Earth, and it was kind of kept off to the side until they fully got absorbed by DC. It's a very confusing editorial mess. Anyways, during the 1940s, Kirby regularly teamed with Simon, creating numerous characters for that company and for National Comics publication, later to become DC Comics. All right. After serving in the European theater in World War II, Kirby produced work for DC Comics, Harvey Comics, Hillman periodicals, and other publishers. I think if I remember one of the other interviews, he was also worked a little bit with Fleischer for a little while, like Fleischer Animations. All right. Kirby produced work for DC. I already read that. At Crestwood Publications, he and Simon created the genre of romance comics and later founded their own short-lived comic company, Mainline Publications. Kirby was involved in Timely's 1950s iteration, Atlas Comics, which in the next decade became Marvel. There, in the 1960s, Kirby co-created many of the company's major characters, including Ant-Man, the Avengers, Black Panther, Fantastic Four, the Hulk, Iron Man, the Silver Surfer, Thor, and the X-Men. Among many other Kirby's titles garnered high sales and critical acclaim. And he did not stop there. But in 1970, feeling he had been treated unfairly, largely in the realm of authorship credit and creators' rights, Kirby left the company for rival DC. Does that sound a little bit familiar? But yeah. This is why I do believe Steve Ditko's claims about Stan Lee more than Stan Lee himself, because it's like, okay, two of your big artists left for the exact same reason, so I think if two artists with completely polar opposite personalities are complaining about the exact same thing, then maybe it is you. All right, at DC, Kirby created his Fourth World Saga, which spanned several comic titles. While the series proved commercially unsuccessful and were canceled, the Fourth World's New Gods have continued as a significant part of the DC universe. So by New Gods, we're talking about Mr. Miracle, we're talking about Big Barda, and all of those characters. Kirby returned to Marvel briefly in the mid to late 1970s. Ooh, sorry. Then ventured into television animation and independent comics. In his later years, Kirby, who had been called the William Blake of comics, poet, painter, and printmaker, became a central figure in history of the poetry and visual art of the Romantic Age. Okay. Began receiving great recognition in the mainstream press for his career accomplishments, and in 1987 he was one of the 3 inaugural inductees of the Will Eisner Comic Book Hall of Fame. In 2017, Kirby was posthumously named a Disney legend for his creations not only in the field of publishing, but also because those creations formed the basis for the Walt Disney Company's financial and critical successful major franchise, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Disney trying to pat themselves on the back for shit they didn't create. It's like, okay, I did appreciate the Marvel Cinematic Universe when it first started, and it did help bring a lot of people into the comic book community. However, that quickly became a double-edged sword where the movies diverted significantly from the comic books, and for some diddly-dang reason, the comic books decided to do that whole all different Marvel right as soon as new people were coming into the comic shop. So when they saw all the new comics, they didn't recognize any of the characters on the cover, because people wanted to go there to read more about Tony Stark, they wanted to read more about Thor, they wanted to read more about Captain America. They're like, who is this black chick in the new robot suit? Why is Thor a chick? Where are all these chicks coming from? Where are my big muscly men who punch other big muscly men? Anyway. Kirby was married to Rosalind Goldstein in 1942. They had 4 children and remained married until his death from heart failure in 1994 at the age of 76. The Jack Kirby Award and Jack Kirby Hall of Fame were named in his honor, and he is known as the king among comic fans for his many influential contributions to the medium. I think that's a very good summary of everything. there is another video I was kind of looking it up, and it's from this channel, Comic Alliance. This video was made 9 years ago, but it gives another side, adds a little bit more detail to certain things that were going on. Hold on. I'm constantly feeling like I need to sneeze right now. So, 2 seconds. And I remember watching this video way back when I was getting back into comics. Alrighty.
You might think you know Jack Kirby, but here are 13 facts you may not have known about the King of Comics. Jack Kirby was born on August 28, 1917 in Manhattan's Lower East Side as Jacob Kurtzberg. The son of Austrian Jewish immigrants, he would create comics under a number of different pen names, including Jack Curtis, Kurt Davis, Ted Gray, and Lance Kirby, before settling on Jack Kirby, which he liked because it reminded him of actor James Cagney.
Oh, okay. James Cagney. That doesn't sound similar at all, but you know what? Whatever. At least we have more of an explanation now of why Kirby specifically.
One of Kirby's earliest and longest collaborators was Joe Simon, with whom he co-created Captain America, the Manhunter, the Boy Commandos, and the Newsboy Legion, as well as revamping the Golden Age version of the Sandman.
That's right, he did work on the Sandman. And I mean, nowadays the only Sandman I know is the Matt Wagner version of the Sandman. That's the only bit of Sandman material I've ever read. I have not gotten into any of Kirby's Sandman, unfortunately.
Among others. In 1947, the two created the genre of romance comics with the first issue of Young Romance. Real Nazis didn't care.
I find it so funny that he worked so hard to bring us romance comics, and then the Comic Code Authority came along and were like, nope, romance corrupts children, you gotta stop it now. And it may possibly lead to communism or whatever. Yeah, because nothing says you will own nothing and be happy like sexy babes on robots comics.
For what happened in the pages of Captain America. One time, Kirby received a phone call at his studio saying that there were 3 Nazis in the lobby ready to show him what they would do to Captain America. Kirby rolled up his sleeves and headed downstairs to sock some Nazis. Caps.
Did I mention that Jack Kirby was kind of known for being a bit of a hothead? He was I'm sure the temper thing has been blown out of proportion, but he was known for not taking crap from anybody back then, which is probably why he butted heads with Stan Lee so often.
Style. But by the time he got there, they had left, narrowly avoiding the beating of their lives.
Pussies.
Kirby was drafted into the army in 1943, ending up in Normandy just a short time after D-Day. When his lieutenant learned Kirby was an artist, he gave him the dangerous task of scouting towns and drawing reconnaissance maps and reference drawings, which, for the record, is insanely dangerous.
I think one of the interviews, I don't know if it's going to be this half-hour long one, or if it's not the half-hour long one, I also got this one where Jack Kirby is talking about his war stories, which I think would be very interesting for us to hear. Yeah, I have so much more material to work with now than I did with the Ditko episode. I mean, I still liked the Ditko episode, but it's like, come on, dude, you couldn't say a few more things while you were alive.
By the 1950s, Kirby found himself at Marvel Comics, and in 1961, he and Stan Lee created the Fantastic Four, starting
God, it is so weird seeing Stan Lee without
He and
glasses.
Stan Lee created...
It's like, I see it, but also my brain is going, no, it's not him. It's because he doesn't have his glasses.
The Fantastic Four, starting a revolution in comics. Over the next decade, Kirby would create or co-create dozens of the most popular characters in comics, including Iron Man, Thor, the X-Men, the Hulk, Ant-Man, the Silver Surfer, and Doctor Doom. Jack Kirby and Stan Lee also introduced the first black superhero, the Black Panther, who first appeared in Fantastic Four number 52 in 1966.
Yeah, that a lot of people forget that Black Panther was indeed created by two white guys because they just fucking wanted to. They didn't have to be incentivized to do anything. They just did it because they fucking wanted to.
When Kirby moved back to DC Comics in 1970, he would introduce many of DC's earliest black heroes, with Flipper Dipper, Viking, and the Black Racer all debuting within a
That's a very silly costume.
few months of each other. In the late 70s, Kirby left comics to work in animation for Hanna-Barbera. While there, he did designs for shows such as Thundar the Barbarian and Turbo Teen, a show about a teen who turns into a sports car whenever he gets too hot. We're gonna chalk
Interesting.
that one up to being from the 80s. Remember that movie Argo? The kind of true story of how the CIA rescued a bunch of hostages from Iran by pretending to make a movie? Part of the real-life ruse was a series of architectural drawings by Kirby, which he had done for a theme park based on the sci-fi novel Lord of Light.
That would have been an amazing theme park, like all the Jack Kirby designs. I wonder why Marvel didn't, or I wonder why Disney didn't make a segment of the Marvel. I know they used to have like a Marvel section of their parks. Why not include some more like Kirby designs in there? Because Kirby's designs, while yes they are retro, they are fantastic. Well, before we continue, like here's some of the stuff he was making. Like it's so abstract, but it's kind of cool too. It's somewhat similar to Ditko's abstractness, but Kirby is a lot more geometrical, I want to say. Like him is a lot more that, whereas Ditko is a lot more fluid and loosey-goosey. Oh yeah, Fighting American. This was Jack Kirby's attempt to give Marvel one last fuck you after he got screwed over. Comics were a bit of a wacky time. Lots of grudges, lots of internal bickering. There was a lot of that stuff. But the difference between then and now is back then they didn't have social media to bitch and moan about their lives. They had to internalize it and they had to be professionals about it. Can we go back to that? Where everyone acted like a fucking adult and we didn't attack each other over petty shit? Can we go back to that? Where people were more stoic and they just didn't go on hour-long live streams to dunk on people for just having a slightly more popular comic book campaign. Let's go back to that. I want to go back to that era.
In 1982, Kirby drew a 3D comic called Battle for the Three-Dimensional World, which included a pair of 3D glasses that said Jack Kirby, King of Comics on them. Somehow, longtime Tonight Show host Johnny Carson got a hold of these glasses and got mad, thinking Kirby, whom he had never heard of, was claiming to be the best stand-up comic. Once the misunderstanding was cleared up, Carson apologized.
You gotta love a man who owns up to the fact that he made a fuck-up. It's like I can understand where the confusion came from, because comic books, comic as in comedian, so I can see where the confusion is, but you know what? At least he apologized for it.
According to writer Mark Evener, Kirby's biographer and former assistant, Kirby wasn't able to drive a car because his mind was always working, creating new characters and stories. He would
That's such an artist thing to do, being so absorbed in your art that you can't focus on the basic stuff.
get so wrapped up in his thoughts that he'd drive his car straight off the road.
Yeah.
Even more so than Joe Simon or Stan Lee, perhaps Kirby's most important partner was his wife Roz, with whom he had 4 children, and whose marriage lasted from 1942 until Jack's death in 1994. He based the personality of his character Big Barda and her loving marriage to Mr. Miracle on his wife and his relationship with her, though physically Barda was based on the mom from My Big Fat Greek Wedding. Kirby is one of the most beloved creators in comics history, and tributes to him in comics abound. Two notable examples include the character Kirby in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, who is an artist with a magical pencil, and an issue of Fantastic Four in which it is revealed that Kirby is the literal god of the Marvel Universe. One last bonus fact. No matter how much you appreciate Jack Kirby, whether it's a little or a lot, it's not enough. It is impossible to overstate Kirby's importance to not only the genre of superheroes, but to the medium of comics as a whole. Besides the classic characters he gifted to the world, so much of the common language of comics originated or was popularized by the mind and tireless pencil of Jack Kirby. Long live the king.
That's right, because of the Marvel method, where Stan Lee would just give like a paragraph at a time, Kirby had to come up with the panel layouts by himself too, so he helped basically lay down the format of how superhero comics were to be made, which is, I would argue, just as important as the art style, because there's a certain way that a superhero comic needs to flow in order for it to be exciting, and you can't write a superhero comic like you would write a horror comic or a romance comic. You have to have a certain flow in the action, the exposition, the dialogue, the still scenes when it comes to superhero comics. And yeah, it's a very important aspect. Oh yeah, I found this, which I think would be kind of funny to look into, because I am 100% expecting it to be something so okay, so the context, I guess we should say. Kirby's surprising answer, why Dr. Doom wore a mask. And of course we know the reason in the comic book lore. It's because, you know, he disfigured himself because he was kind of being an idiot, trying to prove that he was smarter than Reed Richards. But I kind of want to hear the artistic reason of why Doom wore a mask.
That steel mask is a very handsome guy, okay? He's a good-looking guy, but there's one thing wrong with him. He's got a scratch on his chin, and he's frustrated. He knows he's extremely handsome. He's got the scratch on his chin, but you have... Why haven't you got a scratch on your chin? And of course, he doesn't realize that his own anger and frustration is mounting. He's not a bad guy, as you saw in a Fantastic Four. He'd give the Fantastic Four a wonderful meal before he'd kill them. So, Dr. Doom isn't all bad, and he's got a lot of class. He's got a lot of culture. Dr. Doom is a college man, and Dr. Doom is a knowledgeable man. And without that little scratch, which kind of ruins his own personality and supplies that lifelong frustration, that's what makes him the villain he is. And somehow we can't live with each other because of that little scratch. And that's part of maybe the what we call villainy and heroism. I can tell you that the gangsters in my own section lived very short lives. Not because they were villains, or not because they were different than anybody else. It's because they wanted that $200 suit a little faster than the average guy. And they were willing to do things that would put them in jeopardy and put everybody else in jeopardy. But I can tell you they were good to their mothers.
I think that is the ultimate tragedy with Dr. Doom as a character, because he is a very intelligent guy, and he has proven in the past that he's not all bad. He does have a good side to him, and he is willing to put aside his difference to help the heroes from time to time. However, he just cannot let go of his hatred for Reed Richards. He cannot let go his resentment. And because of that, he becomes the villain we know. And he effectively ruins his own life out of spite. Like he's very much the definition of cutting off your nose to spite your face. That is Dr. Doom. And he's not like Lex Luthor, where Lex Luthor was an egotistical guy from beginning to end, and really the only reason he's going after Superman is his own ego. With Doom, it's a lot more venomous, and he just keeps kneecapping himself because he can't let go of that hatred, and it's super sad. But also, he did put himself through all that, so what the heck. Alright, now I want to hear a little bit about Alan Moore, because he also talked about, he talked about Jack Kirby, he also talked about Stan Lee, and he even talked about Steve Ditko. So we're going into, it's a 3-part collision here.
Back to work with is Alan Moore.
Yeah. That was a little bit embarrassing. I did have a sort of somebody got in touch with me from a radio show and said, look, I hope I haven't put my foot in it, but I was doing an interview with Stan Lee and he said the person he'd most like to talk to is you, so I've given him your contact details.
Huh, interesting.
And I really don't have a great deal of respect for Stan Lee. I had huge respect for him when I was a kid. I thought that he was possibly the best writer in the English language that had ever been. But as I said earlier, when you start in the industry, you find out that Jack wasn't jolly, and you find out why. And you find out that Steve wasn't sturdy, and you find out why. And you find out why Stan was smiling. You know, I don't think of him as a particularly gifted writer. I'm not trying to slag somebody who's an old man, but, and it is a big but, you know, but I met Jack Kirby, you know. Jack Kirby created those characters. I'm inclined to think that he created almost all of them by himself. One of the things that makes me think that is Stan.
I don't know, I would say that, because Stan Lee did have a lot of input, but Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko were absolutely doing the heavy lift of actually plotting out and telling the stories. Yeah, and we know the reason why. We discussed this in last week's stream. The reason why Stan Lee invented the Marvel method in the first place was because he was just running almost everything in Marvel. He had so much on his plate, and he simply did not have the time to come up with whole comic book scripts. So he made the Marvel method so he can churn out stories more efficiently, and that unfortunately meant that Jack Kirby had a lot more put on his own plate as far as actually making the comics. But it was very scummy of Stan Lee to not acknowledge that, yes, his artists did co-create the characters.
And Lee, it's in one of those Origins of Marvel Comics books where he reminisces about how him and Jolly Jack created Captain America, you know?
Which is false, because, well, that was Simon who created Captain America.
What a great time that was when me and Jolly Jack created Captain America. Stan Lee was about 12 when Jack Kirby and Joe Simon created Captain America. Now, that might be a slip of the memory, but no, I mean, I don't ever, I mean, my memory, as you saw earlier, where I had to ask somebody to pick up the thread, it's quite bad. Sometimes. But I've never sort of said, oh yeah, well I remember when me and Dave Cockrum created the X-Men. And having seen Jack Kirby's pencils, you've got the whole thing broken down, and Jack Kirby would have done all that. And then you've got Jack Kirby's dialogue suggestions for every panel penciled in the margins. And you start to realise that what Stanley has done is taken, Jack Kirby's dialogue, some of it was a bit clunky. What Stanley had largely done was to fancy up Jack Kirby's dialogue, put in a few these and thous and forsooth, true believer, But essentially it was Jack Kirby who wrote and drew those comics. Essentially it was him who created all of those characters. And that is wrong. And I remember when I did that Steve Ditko program with Jonathan Ross, where Stan Lee will not say,
oh
yes,
yeah,
Steve Ditko created Spider-Man.
Oh yeah, we saw that segment where Stan Lee was just super uncomfortable with that question, because Ditko did call him out. And one of the few times where Steve Ditko was very direct about something, he did call Stan Lee out for that, and Stan Lee was pretty much strong-armed into admitting that, oh yeah, I would consider that he helped create these characters. And it's like, no, it's not a you consider or whatnot. He did co-create those characters.
He will say, in my opinion, Steve Ditko created Spider-Man. But he won't say, yeah, actually, Steve Ditko did create Spider-Man. He won't say that, probably on advice from lawyers. And Jonathan Ross had got him over to come over to do the recording, and Stanley was going to be bringing his lawyer with him. But his lawyer got stuck in traffic. And Jonathan Ross said, oh, we're in a bit of a hurry. Or perhaps he said, hurry, I don't know. But, so eventually Stanley said, oh well, we can do the interview. I trust you. And so Jonathan Ross got him, it was like the Jeremy Paxman moment when he was interviewing Michael Howard on Newsnight. He was saying, so, Stanley, is Steve Ditko the creator of Spider-Man? And Stan Lee was squirming and saying, well, in my opinion, Steve Ditko was the creator of Spider-Man. He said, yeah, that's not what I asked. Your opinion doesn't actually matter for anything. It's not official, is it?
I find it interesting that even though Alan Moore has gone on the record several times that he absolutely disagrees with Steve Ditko's personal politics, and he may or may not have agreed completely with Jack Kirby because, well, he was a rebel himself and he wanted to tear apart the superhero genre in his own way. But I think he, in like this specific moment, he totally feels for both of these guys because, yeah, they were screwed over. And Alan Moore has his own personal history of being screwed over by the comic book industry, so he definitely understands where the anger comes from.
Was Steve Ditko the creator of Spider-Man? About 3 times. He said, well, in my opinion, Steve Ditko's the creator of Spider-Man. Steve Ditko was, during Spider-Man's, I think, 30th anniversary year, Steve Ditko was living in reduced circumstances. All these people, they had their work stolen from them. I don't want to end this on a particularly bitter note, but sort of, you did ask. So, no, not a huge fan of Stan Lee. Huge fan of a lot of the people that he worked with. So that kind of precludes any feelings of fondness for Stan Lee. I suppose we ought to end there. Has anyone got a little short, happy question?
Thanks to work with.
Yeah, so... And this has been talked about for decades. The whole argument with Jack Kirby and him being screwed over with credits, and also, I think, royalties as well. Even though, yes, that is his artwork, yes, everybody acknowledges that Jack Kirby did co-create these characters, but it is a little disheartening and a little scummy that he was not treated with nearly as much respect as he should have been treated. But, alright, so we are now moving on from Alan Moore. How about we read a little segment of this interview article? This is the Comics Journal, and this interview came out this article came out in 2011. And, what's this? Of course we get this introductory paragraph. Accurate enough to refer to Jack Kirby as an American original, but it's hard to know. Let's skip down to when this interview was done. This interview was conducted in 3 different sessions over the summer of 1989 at the Kirby's comfortable home in Thousand Oaks, a suburb of Los Angeles. Jack's wife, Roz, sat in on the interviews and helped recall the precision key points in Jack's career. My thanks to both, specifically for helping assemble artwork illustrating this interview and more generally for their friendship over the last half-dozen years. All images written and drawn by Kirby unless otherwise noted. You see, that is how you credit. Alright, so growing up on the East Side. I skimmed through a little bit of this, and I think we should mention Jack Kirby's childhood and whatnot, because it does explain a lot of his fiery personality. Alright. Jack Kirby. I don't know where your father comes from, but where I came from, everybody was an immigrant. My people were from Europe. My family came from Austria, both my mother and my father. We lived on New York's Lower East Side. The value of money was different then. We paid $12 in rent a month, and oh geez. Can you imagine $12 a month in rent? That sounds fantastic. And a nickel was worth maybe the equivalent of $1 today. It was very hard for a young man to get a nickel from his mother, but somehow you managed. When I visited New York, somebody thought it would give me a big thrill if he took me down there where I grew up, and I'd be thrilled by the sight of my humble origins. And I hated the place. I wanted to get out of there. Alright. Gary Groth. Now, this is the Lower East Side. Exactly what street? It was on Suffolk Street. It was right next to Norfolk Street, and I went to school at PS 20. Why did you hate the place? I hated the place because while it was the atmosphere itself, it was the way people behaved. I got sick of chasing people all over rooftops and having them chase me over rooftops. I knew that there was something better, and instinct told me that it was uptown, and I'd walk every day from my block to 42nd Street where the Daily News was, where I could be near the Journal, the Hearst newspaper. I'd run errands for the reporters. My boss was playing golf in the office, and he was shooting golf balls through an upturned telephone book. See? That's the kind of job I wanted. Why am I getting James Jonah Jameson vibes from that guy? Was this a poor neighborhood? Where I came from, Suffolk Street, it still is, and Norfolk Street is next to it. It still is. The whole area is extremely poor. What did your father do? My father worked in a factory, like everybody else's father. And your parents were immigrants? You just said that. My parents were immigrants, and the place for all immigrants was the factories. They were the source of cheap labor. The immigrants had to make a living. They had to support their families, and they did it on very little, so we had very little. You know, we couldn't wear the best of clothes. I always wore turtleneck sweaters and knickers when I could get them. There were 2 of us, my brother and I. My brother is gone. He passed away, so I'm the only one left in the family. Well, not anymore. He was a younger brother. He was 5 years my junior. He was bigger. He was about 6'1", very broad kid, and when I came out of school, I'd be jumped by all these guys, and he'd see my feet sticking out of the pile and dive in, and he'd pull me out from under the pile, and he'd wail into them. Now, when you say you were jumped and your feet were sticking out of a pile of bodies, it sounds amusing now, but I assume it wasn't amusing then. It's not even amusing now that I think about it. You know, the punches were real, and the anger was real, and we'd chase each other up and down fire escapes over rooftops, and so he was not joking about the rooftop thing. And we'd climb across other clotheslines, and there were real injuries. This was a tough neighborhood. It was the toughest. Can you explain what you mean by that? Were there gangs? Yes, there were gangs all over the place. Some of my friends became gangsters. You became a gangster depending on how fast you wanted a suit. Gangsters weren't the stereotypes you see in the movies. I knew the real ones, and the real ones were out for big money. The average politician was crooked. That was my ambition, to be a crooked politician. I'd see them in these restaurants, and they'd all hold these conferences. I'd see politicians who were supposed to be on opposite sides of issues all together at one table. Did this disillusion you about morality or politics in America? If America gave anybody anything, it is ambition. Bad things would come out of it because some guys are in a hurry, but that doesn't mean they're evil or anything. It just means they fall into bad grace somehow. It was hard to find work. A friend of mine was going to go out to get a job because his mother told him to get a job. So he said, "I'll go out and draw pictures and they'll pay me for them." And his mother said, "No son of mine will become an artist. You'll sit around with barrettes in Greenwich Village and talk to loose women." Of course, mothers were very conventional. Everything was very conventional. You had to have approval. I'll link the rest of the interview if you guys want. I don't want to get too into it, but I think this explains a lot of Kirby having kind of a tough time as the child of immigrant parents, having to fend off bullies, running around like I don't know why I'm getting the image of Newsies in my head, but just running around, getting into fights, and this explains a lot, and I don't know why, but I think this bleeds a lot into his art and his storytelling too, because a lot of his characters, they kind of, yeah, they're good guys, but they also have like that tough guy edge to them, and his characters were also very human and very understanding of the fact that, yeah, people, sometimes they fall into the wrong crowd, but that's not entirely because they chose that life. It was because, hey, if you wanted to get a nice suit faster, you had to do this. So, still selfish, depending on your perspective, but it does give a good amount of insight on his writing and on his artwork. Alright, so here's this interview that's from the 14th of March, 1993, a half hour with Jack Kirby for the Jack Kirby Museum.
And she's coming out, you know, the top's coming. I have a bunch called the Secret Six. Satan's Six, I'm sorry. The Secret City.
Sounds like
Yeah. Satan's Six is a bunch of guys who are they're trying to get into hell. But the devil won't let them because they're not all bad. So they try to go out and do bad things, which turn out to be good. So they get into hell. They can't make it.
it's the opposite of wanting to try to get into heaven.
Well, no, the heaven they never make, so they never get in there.
They're too bad for heaven, too good
Yeah,
for hell.
they're too bad for heaven, too good for hell. And Night Fighter is another type of action.
Will you be at WonderCon this year?
I don't get around too much.
So you
I
don't.
might be in San Diego when they have it there.
You live down in Southern California still?
I'm sorry?
You still live in Southern California?
Oh, yes.
Okay, so that's where you sent this letter from.
Yeah, I'm 1,000 years.
So you don't know if you make it up here again for WonderCon?
Gee, I don't know. I really can't say. But my wife might try to get me out of the house.
You got a face on that guy.
You really surprised somebody when he came in the door. Youngish person, 20s, came in and said, "He looks pretty spry and good. How old did you say he was?"
104.
Audio quality is a little bunk in this one, so I'm having a hard time. Let's turn on the subtitles. Maybe this will help.
Gee, I don't know. I really can't say. But my wife might try to get me out of the house.
You got a face on that guy.
You really surprised somebody when he came in the door. Youngish person, 20s, came in and said, "He looks pretty spry and good. How old did you say he was?"
104. And like I said, love comics I used to.
I remember the love comics.
I remember
and
too. I remember they were on the newsstands.
I remember
And,
being
you know,
little.
they didn't have a comic.
I remember being little and reading my much older sister's copies.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, my parents used comics to teach us how to read. They figured it was safer material than some stuff that was coming out then.
Oh,
That's another thing that's a point I made way back when I did the Comics Code Authority stream, when the Comics Code Authority was bitching about how comics were not promoting good education and were not very helpful for young kids. And I'm like, well, comic books can help some kids learn how to read and learn how to follow a story. I mean, are they the highest form of art? No. But they can help kids who might struggle and deliver and have them learn to read in a way that's fun for them. So I don't understand why the teachers were so mad, because like, your kids are reading. Shouldn't you just be happy that they're reading? No, they're not reading Ulysses, but they are reading.
I do all about nice girls. You know.
Such thing.
I respect the girls. You know.
Just like there's no such thing as bad boys, huh?
Right.
Around my block, you had to. You know, you could be a gangster, you know. But you know, if you didn't respect somebody's mother or somebody's sister, you know, they beat the heck out of you.
Why the hell am I getting Johnny Bravo vibes from that statement?
And this type of thing was, you know, pure romance, pure love. And the dreams were really great. Sure. And you can interpret them your own way.
It's amazing looking back at some of this stuff and seeing who was doing the westerns and romance and stuff like you.
It was me.
Yeah, you, Gil Kane, Ernie Colan,
That's right.
several others who are now.
Of course, there's a wider variety now.
Kinda, sorta. A lot of romances kind of bleed into sci-fi and superheroes, which I guess it's fine, but it's like, can we just have a straightforward romance? I mean, don't get me wrong, there are romance comics out there, they just get heavily overshadowed by superheroes.
This is the way the guys looked at the BBR.
The BBR?
The Boys Brotherhood Republic. And we had our own mayor and our own DA. You know.
Now, what was that?
I was the newspaper editor.
Ah.
This was on the Lower East Side of New York.
Huh.
And
Near where my parents used to live.
yeah. And this was my best friend. He was the flyer, you know, but he passed away. He's gone now. I was a young man once.
I'd be asking several questions if you weren't a young man once.
He was the popular actor at that time. He's back. There's Roosevelt. Yeah, this was a type of editorial I would do. Kind of a takeoff on Popeye. I did all kinds, westerns.
Did you ink all this earlier work, or is this inked by Dick Ayers, or did you ink this?
No, this is inked by, probably by Mike Rowan.
Oh, so did you typically ever, like in the early Marvel stuff?
Yes, I inked a little bit. I didn't really because I was too busy making up that story.
Yeah, you know how the collectors are, you know.
So I didn't have time really for inking. Well, you couldn't do the entire thing. You'd kill yourself.
I heard a story that used to go when the page was all done, you used to outline your figures with a big black marker. Is that true? That you would do that? Or is that just
No, I put the shading on the pencil.
Long time ago.
This is my ink right here. That's
Yeah, there was some controversy. It wasn't a controversy. It was a controversy among comic book fans where, I forget the name of the guy, but he inked for Jack Kirby for a little bit, and he distorted the hell out of Jack Kirby's style. So, if you guys can remember the name, just throw it in chat.
I can see it's like the pencil. The lines are there.
I grew up in Canada.
They're powerful in their own way. Just like the pencil.
My neighbor was at some point.
use a brush?
I remember we were camping in.
No.
We started reading it. For us, it's just a picture. You have no English. Reading it. But it was really stressful kind of story.
The grays.
Read it. And you can tell the story though through the pictures. Yeah.
These are
The
my
only thing is, of course,
I'm curious
I
about
never knew what happened with all the deaths.
maybe you can turn this page a couple of and I can see a different character. Like a,
white
there's this one style that you do where you make kind of like a blob and you draw it down and you make a squiggle and another blob at the end. I don't know exactly. Is that your technique? Is that? Because I see it a lot of Huh? No, I know you draw the, like as a rendering, you know, as like making a bicep or something.
No, I make one line a little more powerful. Or with a little more shape.
Okay, I'm sorry, guys. These closed captions are not doing well, and the audio is kind of crappy for this video. I'll still link it in the description if you guys want to listen to the whole thing, but this is the one that I'm the most interested in. Jack Kirby talking about war.
And look what Siegel and Schuster did. Superman's going to live forever. See? And Superman's going to be, Superman, as far as I'm concerned, it saved my life. Because I couldn't believe anybody could kill me. Out of 1,000 men, only me and 4 other guys came out. See, people think about war like they think about comics or they think about Broadway plays. They don't think that it's serious, that it's reality. And, but it is. You got to kill that guy. My sergeant hit me on the head with a steel helmet when we were holding a brick factory. And the SS troopers came busting through the door like an Errol Flynn movie. And try it. You stand in front of the path of a truck. Stand there until the truck is almost on top of you. And you know that you can't get out of the way. And that truck is going to hit you. You stand there and try to take it. And there's this guy coming toward you with a Schmeiser. The Schmeiser is aimed at your head. And this guy looks like a butcher. See? And he's got all the accoutrements on him, and he's going to kill you, and there's no way out of it, and you got your gun on him, and he's got his gun on you. What do?
Shoot Shoot first.
I didn't know what to do. Until a sergeant was yelling and screaming at all the guys. He came over and banged me right on my helmet with his. And I shot the guy. It's like being in front of a Mack truck, knowing that there's no way out. You can't get away from this Mack truck. There's traffic on one side, traffic on the other. You're in the middle, and this Mack truck's coming on you. What do you do? You tell me. I'll buy it.
Yeah, his answer is to stop it.
Yeah.
Any way you can.
Yeah. I was talking with a lieutenant. Next thing I know, I'm all the way into the factory, and the lieutenant's a red smear on the wall. And he was across the street smearing on a big red smear on a wall. And I'm knocked all the way into the factory. And I run back. I didn't know what the hell happened. I didn't hear nothing or see anything. And there's 3 tanks coming up the street with infantry on both sides. And this guy took a direct hit while he was talking with me. He was from Brooklyn. And he got in, he made lieutenant by ROTC in college. And so we had something in common and we were talking. And the next thing you know, no sound, no nothing. Like, there you are on the 4th floor of another building. And you don't know what you're doing there. And this guy's a red smear on a wall, and you can't get more undignified than that. See? And then you're in the real thing.
So what did you do?
That's such a brutal way to put it. It's like, yeah, you were just talking to this guy a few months ago, and now he's a red smear on the wall. That's, it almost sounds cold. I don't think he was trying to be cold about it, but certainly sounds cold the way you put it. But then again, it is war. It's not a fun time for anybody.
Huh?
So what did you do?
I did what I had to do. And we were all firing out the windows, and there were 2 guys waiting for a Jeep to take them to, we had 2 wounded guys. Then we captured this brick factory. And I slept in the oven because it was warm. And
You feel like you were maybe daring them by doing that?
oh yeah, the bricks were hot, I might have come out a cookie, and here we are.
I would make a very inappropriate joke, but yeah, I'm not going to do that because, there's a very inappropriate joke to be made there.
These 2 guys, the wounded guys, are standing all bandaged up waiting for this Jeep. Next thing we know, the wounded guys are dead, and the Germans are charging in, and it's an Errol Flynn picture, right? One guy, there's a German coming at me, one guy from the 2nd floor hits him in the head with a steel-jacketed bullet. And this guy goes back through 4 rooms, okay? And the pictures are spilling out of his hat, all the pictures of the Hitler Jugend and his mother and his father and his girlfriend and him in his Hitler uniform and his whole life, like you talk about pieces, right? And these were all in his helmet. And these guys were so sure they were going to take us that, they kept all those souvenirs. And this went on all the time, every 5 minutes. I was a veteran 5 minutes after I got there. We were sitting there next to a big ravine, okay? We'll call it a ravine. This ravine travels along France. It's hundreds of feet down, and this is early winter. I can't hear anything. We're sitting, we're replacements. Where they sit us down in a field, and there's a tent right on the edge of this big cliff. And the wind is blowing hard, And a colonel comes out of his tent with the officers, and he's speaking to us, and I can't hear him. The wind is howling. And the last words I hear are something like, "Go on there, you mother." So,
Laugh the pain away. Laugh the pain away.
and the strange sounds coming up from that wind. I don't know what the hell these sounds are. And then the wind starts howling again and the sounds disappear. We're sitting in this big open beautiful field. It's so tranquil, the grass is waving back and forth. And the wind is whipping it around and we can't hear the colonel, we can't. But occasionally the wind will blow some other direction. And we hear these sounds. And after the colonel's speech, he gives us the old finger and he goes back into the tent, and they tell us to get up on our feet, and we walk 1,000 feet down this cliff where a tank battle is going on. And those are the sounds we heard. Guys are running back and forth across the Moselle River, naked. A German runs up to me and wants to surrender. He takes his helmet off and I says, "Get the hell out of here." I says, "I don't know where I'm supposed to go." He runs up to me, throws away his steel helmet, and everything, and he's running around, his shirt is blasted off, and guys are running around the river, the bodies laying around, and we're trying to march someplace. We're trying to find a lieutenant, we're marching in line, and this whole fucking massacre is going on. It's a massacre.
It's like you walk into the situation and you just have no idea what the hell is going on. Oh my gosh, I can't even imagine. I can't imagine just being in war in general. I mean, there is always the possibility that war might come to America, and there's always the possibility that they might redo the draft where they include women in the draft, and I might get drafted. So there is always a possibility that violence might come to me. I can't even imagine being part of that. War seems like such a foreign concept to me. I mean, I know it happens, and I know men go to war all the time, and I know violence happens all the time. It's just, for me personally, having to kill for the necessity of winning the war, that is such a foreign concept to me, and just the utter chaos of a massacre is a foreign concept to me. I mean, thank God it is, but yeah.
And everybody's yelling and screaming, and we're marching in line there, right where it was to replace some guys. And finally we do replace them, and the whole thing is over. The Germans are gone, everybody's gone, and there was one shell that hit that I see these Germans laying in a row. It's a beautiful row. They made a perfect circle, except the bottom half of their bodies were missing. See? And the shell evidently hit right in the middle of this group and threw them out in a circle. Okay? And you see a lot of these nice designs if you're an artist,
That's one way to look at it, Mr. Kirby. Okay. That was a heavy one. A good chunk of these clips that I'm pulling from, by the way, is from the YouTube channel, the Jack Kirby Museum and Research Center. So if you guys want to watch more Kirby content, go ahead and subscribe to this channel so you can watch more stuff by him. Alright, the half-hour one. Here's another Kirby interview. Let's see if I have any more. Alright, I already did that one. That one. Entertainment Tonight. Let's see. I think I'll do this one next.
Jack Kirby is an important name for you to know because Jack Kirby's career spans the entire history of comic books, from the early 30s right up to today. Jack Kirby, when he began, had one of the most energetic styles of any artist. His work practically leaps off the page at you. In the 60s, he went to work for Marvel Comics, where he created the Fantastic Four, the Hulk, the Silver Surfer, and a host of other characters that you all know, in collaboration with a man named Stan Lee. This was the basis of the new Marvel House of Ideas, and it again revolutionized comics. And
oh, thanks, Mike. Good to see you today. I didn't know if that was you as one of the watchers, but yeah, it's good to see you.
Marvel Comics became the most popular in the world. In the 70s, he worked for another comic house, DC, and created the Fourth World, Kirby's Fourth World. There were 3 comics, The Forever People, The New Gods, and Mr. Miracle. And in this triumvirate of comics, he created a whole new universe of characters with a lifestyle and with a philosophy that was his alone.
I see that story first. I feel that story first. I know those people first. When I put them down, they've already lived. And I put them down as I'd like them to live on those pages. My stories are very sincere. My stories are people's stories. And there's elements in my stories that are very, very real. And it doesn't matter what the subject is. And I've done stories in a wide range of subjects. My inspirations were the fact that I had to make sales.
Gotta love an honest answer.
And I had to come up with characters that were no longer stereotypes. In other words, I couldn't depend on gangsters. I had to get something new. And of course, for some reason, I went to the Bible. I came up with Galactus.
Am I the only one who thinks in this interview he sounds like he's got cotton in his mouth, like in The Godfather? I don't know if it's maybe the audio quality with this one, but it sounds like he's got cotton in his mouth.
And there I was in front of this tremendous figure who I knew very well because I've always felt him, and I certainly couldn't treat him in the same way that I would any ordinary mortal. And I remember in my first story, I had to back away from him to resolve that story. And of course, the Silver Surfer is the fallen angel. And
correct me if I'm wrong, but Ben Grimm, the Thing, there's this one Jewish Jewish story about this statue. It's not called a golem. It was called something else. But it was a statue that would come to life and it would help protect the innocent. And I see a lot of similarities between that tale and The Thing. Hold on. Sorry, I'm stopping the interview now. Ooh. Before we go, though, let's take a look at this. Ooh, that's very pretty. I especially like the design of the robot here and the little halo of red circles. But, alright. My ADHD brain has gotten so bad the last few weeks. I need to finally sit down and write another comic script. But anyway, let's get all... Oh, so it is a golem. Oh, okay, so I was correct the first time. And, you know, Ben Grimm, he looks like a rock monster. He's Jewish. So, I see the similarities. I don't know if Jack Kirby has gone on the record for Ben Grimm. double check because I don't want to put words into his mouth or I don't want to make shit up. There we are, the thing. Alright, 616. Down, down, down. Okay, so this one goes more into the character and not the actual... Okay, the thing. Wikipedia again! Alright. Appearance rank, Clockwork time, the period of media, publication history, yeah, we know about that. Where is inspiration? So it doesn't really say. If we haven't found the point where Jack Kirby makes it clear what the inspiration was, and we haven't gotten to that in this video, let me know. Send me a message and let me know, because I don't know why I'm getting a strong connection between the thing and the golem. But anyway, let's go back to where were we? Not you. There we are.
And when Galactus relegated him to Earth, he stayed on Earth. And that was the beginning of his adventures. And they were figures that had never before been used in comics. They were above mythic figures. And of course, they were the first gods. And I began thinking along those lines. And the new gods evolved from those lines. And I began to ask myself, everybody else had their gods, what are ours? What is the shape of our society in the form of myth and legend? Who are our gods? Who are our evil gods? And who are our good ones? And I tried to resolve them in the new gods. And I came up with some very, very interesting characters and very good sales, which satisfied me immensely. Now, I didn't resolve the questions. I'm a guy who lives with a lot of questions. I say, what's out there? And I try to resolve that. And I never can. I don't think anybody can. Who's got the answers? I sure would like to hear the ultimate one. But I haven't yet. And so I live with a lot of questions. And I find that entertaining. I find that entertaining. And if my life were to win tomorrow, it would be fulfilled in that manner. I would say the questions have been terrific. The comic book medium itself is special.
That is such an incredible panel. Like the New God, I think that's New Genesis up there, all the details, all the line, the colors. It looks so intriguing and fun at the same time.
It's something that was, that's a result of evolvement. From what I understand, the editorial comic was first. And then they added a few panels to that and you had a comic strip. And they added a few pages to that and you had a comic book. And what we can add to the comic book, we may have to think about that. So I believe that's the interesting part of the entire field, is to say, what is it? Where is it going? How it'll evolve? And we experiment with that every day.
All right, that's very interesting. Jeez, what the hell is the Daily Wire getting up to now? Oh, they have the comic section drama. We are not getting into that because I do not care enough about the Daily Wire to even don't dedicate more time to them. Alright, so this is Entertainment Tonight.
Kirby, comic book characters a goal.
We could do better. We want to do better.
Our spotlight today falls on the people who nibble at the edges of the entertainment world, like the rather surprising English group called The Clash. Also in that category is a man named Jack Kirby. He's the guy to blame if your kids or yourself seem to have an unnatural longing to turn on the TV set on a Saturday morning and join the company of some superheroes. Catherine Mann reports.
How many characters have you created?
It would probably come to an army division.
By his own admission, Jack Kirby's superhero creation...
What the hell was with this special effects? They clearly did not respect him enough.
...are so numerous, even he can't keep track. After some 40 years at the drawing board and an estimated 40,000 pages of action with such characters as Captain America, Fantastic Four, and the Avengers, Kirby is the undisputed king of comic book superheroes.
What do your characters represent?
Well, the characters represent a sort of a transcendent feeling that we all have inside us, that we could do better. We want to do better. We haven't time to do better. That we can be the people that we lionize.
To anyone passing by his Southern California home, Jack looks like anything but a muscle-bound superhero.
He's taking care of his garden. I don't know why, but I find it so adorable when older men take great pride in their lawn and their garden, and they're taking such care to make it all look perfect and beautiful. I don't know why, I just find it so adorable when older men are like that.
But according to him, it's what's inside the mind that counts.
If you look at my characters, you'll find me. No matter what kind of character you create or assume, a little of yourself must remain there.
During the afternoon we spent with him, Jack couldn't resist including me in one of his action-packed plots. That's me, being thrown from a helicopter by two vicious villains. But in the nick of time, I'm saved by a flying passerby.
Oh, you're...
I don't know if he did that off the cuff. I think they did that for the news segment.
Downing me nicely there, Jack. Thanks a lot. This is Catherine Mann you've never seen before and probably never will again.
This is my normal masculine instinct.
As he sits each day at his board, alone with his characters, Jack Kirby is far from lonely.
I haven't got the trappings of a circus, but there in my mind is a very active and bright and colorful place that's as good as any circus that I've ever seen. And I live with that, and I enjoy it immensely.
And that was of the new Catherine Mann, huh? Well, now we're going to move from the weird world to the real world.
That was a very short segment. I thought it would be a little bit more interesting than that, but golly. Alright, oh, jeez. Okay. So let's shift our focus now to videos that are about Jack Kirby. Maybe that will be helpful. Ooh, what's this? Oh, there we got your comment, Mike. Alright, so let's just go to Jack Kirby and see what we get with just Jack Kirby, not... Oh, this was the guy I was kind of referring to, Vince Scoletta. Alright, Legend of Batman. Why am I getting that in my searches? Alright. Jack Kirby, storyteller. It looks interesting, but it's over an hour long. Alright. Okay, how about strip panel naked? I do not know who they are all about, but you know what? Let's check this guy out.
Jack Kirby developed this very recognizable style, probably most noticeably in those big chunky hands and fingers and faces that often looked carved out of a rock. It became increasingly stylized as his career progressed. The use of Kirby dots and speed lines linked to this, but there was a process in getting to this look. One born out of necessity for speed, sure, but in that speed came a signature look that still stands up as an excellent and clear approach to comic book storytelling.
Because I think Jack Kirby has one of like the most iconic styles where you look at it and it's like, oh yeah, that's Jack Kirby. Like, there's no doubt about it, like, oh yeah, that's him. Because I hate to say this because it sounds so mean, but a lot of artists' styles do blend together, especially mangaka. A lot of manga artists, their styles kind of blend together, and I can't tell who did what unless it's a popular series and I recognize the characters immediately. But with Jack Kirby, it's like, no matter what he does, you can absolutely tell that he did it.
So in this episode, I want to look at Kirby's style and see how it answers the question of what we mean when we talk about an artist's style in comics. You're watching Strip Panel Naked, I'm Hass, and I'm going to show you some of the cool stuff lurking in the pages of some of the best comics. So, to get a good understanding of how this style changed, we've got to look at his early work. Strips like The Black Buccaneer had a style that moved a little more towards realism. A clear light source and shading, and a contrast to his style by the time we reached the Eternals in the 70s. Even on more superheroic works, Kirby still tended towards that kind of realism, and you can see it in early Captain America. It's very much the antithesis of character work that would define Kirby's later art. Lanky and lean as opposed to thick and stocky. It's actually not until you get into Kirby's superhero publisher work much later on, around Marvel and DC, that you see that style start to really develop. And a big part of that seems to have been speed. The difference between an earlier issue...
Jack Kirby style is motion, explosions, and that faces are full of emotion. Yep. His art is not subtle, but it does give that pow and pop that comic books, that especially superhero comic books, need to be exciting.
Issue of Captain America and when Kirby returns to the title in issue 193 really shows that difference. Chunkier, thicker ink lines, a much more stylized look. Though actually the building blocks of the paneling and composition approaches is the same. And this raises that question, the question that I want this episode to kind of answer, which is, what do we mean when we talk about an artist's style? Because here is a comic book artist whose look seems to change quite dramatically over a few decades. However, a lot of the foundational points of the style are actually the same. And the first of those is the gridded approach. As a general rule, for his later work, I want to look at what Kirby did with the Eternals, which was built heavily on a grid, most frequently the 6-panel grid. This is the same as Captain America 2, both when Kirby began with the series and when he returned to the comic later on. And you can see the same hallmarks in the paneling approach. And at this point in Strip Panel Naked, we've heavily discussed the grid, but it's worth saying that for Kirby, it appeared to be a solution for pacing and paneling that was really workable. The grid could expand, as it often did on one tier, allowing a slightly more dynamic image, and Kirby could always switch it up to a 4-panel grid if desired, but ultimately it's the 6th grid that seems to give you enough density, still allows panels to work as pairs on a tier, and fits, interestingly, the square approach that is reminiscent of the kinds of strips that Kirby initially worked on and was probably most familiar with. And the other thing is compositional elements, because Kirby seemed to stick to a pretty simple rule, which was to try and have a clear foreground and a clear background element. One was a focal point of the panel, and one was used as a way of kind of filling in some space and adding a bit more dynamism. And that is a key point that we will come back to with some other techniques, like the Kirby dots and speed lines too. But if you look at this panel, for example, Kirby has one character looking towards the reader, placed in the background. And the back of 2 heads just make up the foreground. So the back of heads means, obviously, yes, it's a quicker draw, but it still allows dialogue from those characters. And the background character is rendered in a heavy brush style across the chest, which minimizes rendering on him too. Elsewhere on the page, something similar happens where you have 2 characters in the background while just the leg of the same character stands in the foreground. And it is dynamic staging, it's really dynamic staging, but it also means it's a lot quicker for Kirby to draw this than it is to draw like an entire extra body. Another panel on this page repeats the same format too, the first panel having a character in the background with a planet sat in the foreground. It immediately makes that panel more dynamic because it has depth.
So So I guess a simpler way of putting this is Kirby knew how to mess with perspective enough to convey, okay, this is what you should be focusing on. These are the people who are talking. And he also uses abstract art to make a more poignant point. So that's because a lot of it from his panels, it is the perspective to add drama. Much like with movies, it's usually how the shot is shot that either adds or detracts drama from a scene. You don't just have the camera be still all the time or focusing on a certain thing all the time. You gotta shift the perspective around to convey importance or to add a little bit of drama. And it seems like Kirby really mastered that in his artistic evolution. Hold on. What the shit did you do, OBS? Alright, chat, let me know if I blipped out there. Hey Mike, can you send a message to make sure I'm still streaming okay? OBS has apparently decided it wants to be a dick. Oh no. Someone? I know there's at least 2 of you in there. Oh well. I guess I'll unpause the video. Oh, yep, still streaming? Okay, very good.
And it also makes Kirby's decisions on the page easier, because he's working this into a standard system. The panels almost start to design themselves when you pull from those handful of approaches, and you know what will work and what won't. And this is where the Kirby dots and the speed lines also come in, because they added a way for Kirby to give extra dimension to a panel that may not necessarily have had another character or anything else in there. Kirby dots basically added instant texture. If you look at that same panel with the planets, it has the appearance of a very deep background. But what that is built from is really just a series of nondescript circles and Kirby dot patterns. Similarly, on another page, speed lines are used in 2 panel backgrounds just to add some texture and dynamism to otherwise empty backgrounds. While on another 2 panels on the same page, Kirby dots are used in the exact same way, just to fill in a background that has no other rendering. Therefore, Kirby is able to very quickly and easily add depth to an otherwise blank space. Because it's in that shorthand where you see what an artist deems important for their own work. And with Kirby, that was really clear. If his interest seemed less about backgrounds or dynamic panel layouts or realistic rendering of figures, then what's left? It's the theatrical heightened drama of a character. Everything is big and bold, the chunky nature of the figures aids the stories he was telling, these large space soap operas. Everyone is constantly in a dynamic pose of action, right? Screaming or pointing or flinging themselves forward or locked upright with their arms crossed, right? And the line is key too. Kirby's thick brush creating a solid silhouette and outline, and check out last time's episode for more on that. Which meant he had very little rendering to do within the figures. And often you'll find it was nothing more than just defining some muscles or some kind of textures on cloth. Otherwise, his figures were built on a similar foundation. A strong oblong head with defined cheekbones in every case, and stocky figures with thick calves and fingers that could contort for drama. So this is the question of style, right? This is the question that this episode is trying to answer. What is an artist's style? The easiest way to define this is to take what an artist puts forward. So what are they placing in many of their pages, many of their comics? How are they composing them in similar ways? And what are they leaving out, right? You could say that style is as simple for Kirby as not putting in backgrounds, but that leaves out the understanding of why that happens. So in Kirby's example, dropping backgrounds out means speed, but they're also replaced by texture, which aids in storytelling and is able to add drama. And this is the reason why Kirby's storytelling was and is so strong. All of his touches to style, his backgrounds, the Kirby dots, the figure works, all of that, it's doing the same thing. Essentially, he's adding the same theory to different elements of the practice. All those elements there are working to create heightened theatrical drama that is clear and concise on the page, minimizing the elements down to their key focal points.
Yeah, Deco people looked like they were in the middle of a nervous breakdown. Kirby's looked like they were yelling and screaming. It is very interesting. It's almost like you can kind of tell their own personalities through their style. Like, say, something like, like John Byrne. He has, like, a very warm but stern style, if that makes any sense. I am awful at art. In my blog, and a couple of times, one of the editors to the places I publish my articles to, they tell me, expand on the art more, talk more about the art, and it's like, I would love to, but I'm kind of shit at explaining art. I'm a writer, not an artist. I try to explain as best as I could why I think an art style is good or bad, but I am shit with coming up with ways to describe it. I don't know how to do it.
His style is really just a way to learn what he considered important in visual storytelling. Make everything theatrically big in the figures, and look, the reader's going to go with you. I'm aware that much of this kind of sounds like I'm saying maybe Kirby was lazy and that he didn't want to draw certain elements, but that's really a misunderstanding of what his style was. Much of this absolutely was born out of a necessity to draw comic book pages fast. But he did this in the smartest way possible, which is to understand what was important and what was relevant to the kinds of stories he wanted to tell. And what he effectively did was manage to turn shorthand into his style. Or rather, I think this is probably the more accurate way of saying that, he proved that so often what style actually is an artist's shorthand. Thanks for watching. If you're a fan of Strip Pile Naked, you can support the Patreon page, where for your pledge you'll get access to years worth of exclusive content and annotations.
Again, not an artist. I can't really comment much on art style and whatnot. Alright, let's see if we can find... I'm trying to save all the videos so I can add the links to them in the end. Alright, read X-Men Comics Online. Oh, it's 48 minutes long. We do not have time to do that. Jack Kirby and the Mob? Well, that looks interesting. Yeah, go away, H&R Block.
Like my ambition was, I wanted to be a crooked politician. Because coming from a deprived neighborhood, you know, money meant a lot. Mm-hmm. And so I felt that dirty politicians made a lot of it.
Yeah.
So I told my mother that I'd be a crooked politician.
Imagine if your kid came up to you and said, Daddy, Daddy, or Mommy, Mommy, I want to become a crooked politician when I grow up. It's like, appreciate the honesty, kiddo, but how about you aim for something a little bit more noble?
This guy right here is Jack Kirby. He's responsible for characters like the Fantastic Four, Hulk, the X-Men, Darkseid, and an army of others. Before making his mark in the world of comic books, he was just Jacob Kurtzberg. Born in 1917 to working-class Austrian immigrants in the Lower East Side, Kurtzberg lived a hard life, facing financial difficulties and gang violence from the environment he grew up in.
I couldn't accept the poverty, and I couldn't accept my parents in poor circumstances. I was a depression child, and I couldn't accept the things that were going on around me. I wanted to get away from them.
A lot of Kirby's work and his personality seemed to be about fighting against something, whether it was fascism, inequality, or restrictive publishing practices from comic book companies. Kirby only ever produced one autobiographical story in his career. It was a 10-page story called Street Code, published in 1990, which covered his Lower East Side upbringing during the Great Depression. That story is a rare gem and gives an equally rare look at Kirby's early life through his own drawings and words. Throughout his life, Kirby was fascinated by pulp magazines, science fiction, movies, and comic books. He planned to use his love of storytelling to make a better life for himself. However, Kirby noticed how some other people would leave the Lower East Side by joining gangs.
You know, gangsters have been glamorized, but gangsters in truth died very young. And they were injured very young. And at that time, the police were rougher on them.
And the gangsters were rough on themselves, and they were rough on the kids around the block. It wasn't the kind of a life that anyone would dream about. And yet, the gangsters did it because they got money faster. They wanted to wear a good suit.
That does seem to be the common underlying theme with how a lot of gangs start. It's like nobody wants it, and everybody acknowledges that the gangster life is not exactly a good life. But it does provide somewhat of a community. It's not the best community, but it also provides a way to earn money, and yeah, it's a very complicated situation. Gangs. It's like, I understand why someone would join a gang, but at the same time, it's pretty much acknowledged by everyone that you probably shouldn't join one.
I don't think their intentions were evil. I think a guy just wanted to wear a good coat. He wanted a nice hat. He wanted enough money in his pocket to take out a girl. And there are people, it's not a new story. People have gone beyond the law to live better, to look better, and to do the better things.
Interlude? Favorite Jack Kirby comic? What about you guys? What's your favorite Jack Kirby comic? Because, again, I have not read a whole lot of Jack Kirby, like the original Jack Kirby comics. Though I've heard his Fantastic Four run was pretty good. And I do want to read some of the Mr. Miracle stories at one point. Because Mr. Miracle is a very interesting character.
After his heavy lifting to help bring Marvel to life in the 60s, Kirby became frustrated and decided to leave for what he thought were greener pastures. In 1970, he went over to DC for
Wait a minute, hold on. Back up a little bit.
Kirby became frustrated and decided to leave for what he thought were greener.
Oh my god, I'm just now seeing that the Human Torch is lighting Jack Kirby's cigar. That's such a cute little detail there.
Pastures. In 1970, he went over to DC for promises of creative freedom. Initially, the fanfare for his arrival at the distinguished competition was optimistic, with news of original Kirby projects. One of his lesser-known projects at DC is In the Days of the Mob from 1971, which was produced while he was putting out his Fourth World titles. This project is written, drawn, and edited by Kirby with inks by Vince Colletta. This thing is relentlessly filled to the brim with 1930s mobster insanity. In the first issue, Jack guides readers through the actual stories of infamous mob figures of the 30s. Some of those figures include Mob Barker, Al Capone, and Pretty Boy Floyd, among others. Some of the stories are 70s Kirby remakes of crime comics he did with his longtime collaborator and Captain America co-creator Joe Simon in the 40s. Simon isn't involved with this project, however Simon and Kirby would reunite for a Sandman reboot in 1974.
He does seem to have a much better working relationship with Joe Simon than he did with Stan Lee.
Mob is printed in black and white with a magazine-size format. The inking doesn't look rushed in the way some of Coletta's work usually is. It's arguably his cleanest work with Kirby. In fact, Colletta seems to feel right at home working on a project about the mob. Kirby doesn't shy away from depicting the brutality of gangsters. He doesn't glamorize greed or bloodshed. He holds gangsters accountable while explaining how and why they exist. Kirby understood the horrors of war and didn't set out to make a slaughterfest comic. However, Mob is more explicitly aggressive and mature than a lot of his work. There was only ever one issue of Mob published, however Kirby and inker Mike Royer did complete a second issue that's been reprinted in recent years. The second issue feels more linear and cohesive than the first.
I get the very strong suspicion that we're probably never gonna get a full I'm probably never gonna read it unless I go on a piracy website. Gangsters, Murder Inc. came out in my area. A lot of other gangs. There were shootings every Friday night in the candy store.
It focuses on the Murder Inc. crime group, which came out of Kirby's neighborhood. These stories depict a culture Kirby witnessed firsthand. The mob's influence on Kirby is apparent throughout his career, even in his superhero work. There's a Fantastic Four story where the Thing is kidnapped and taken to a planet of mobsters to fight in gladiator matches. In Commandy, there's a two-parter where the last boy on Earth goes up against a Westworld Chicago gangland mashup. In his Captain America Bicentennial battles, Kirby gives his childhood self a cameo, where he's working as a newsboy being attacked by mobsters before Captain America saves him.
Aww.
Kirby survived a rough upbringing and the horrors of war. He explored those experiences in his work through stories about the cosmos or a little closer to home with a number 2 pencil and some paper. Here's to the king. The transcript for this video and all of my other essays can be found on my website, witsendpod.com. If it's not on there, it's not me. Chaos ensues.
Alright, so let's see, we might have time for one more video. There's got to be a video of him talking about drawing itself. Ooh, Jack Kirby Art Secrets? Alright, let's check this out. Get away, peacock.
Imagine the power to create worlds and bring characters to life. That's the realm of comic book artists. My name is Ray Raynette, and welcome to Farlook Studios.
Hey,
I'm a self-published comic book writer and illustrator, and today we'll talk about 10 things that helped me improve and create the comic of my dreams. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel for more secrets, and go check out and read.
This better not be like a personal thing, because I really want to get to like Jack Kirby's Artist Secrets.
My comic book series, Junket, Hidden Worlds Revealed, only on Amazon. Now back to the video. Today, we'll be discussing 10 things that we could learn from the great and late Jack Kirby. Jack Kirby, the king of comics, was a visionary artist and storyteller whose influence on the medium is undeniable. Not only is he the man who single-handedly penciled out the entire Marvel universe as we know it, creating all of the characters within the Avengers, Fantastic Four, Black Panther, and even creating the prototype for the Thanos figure within the DC universe, making Darkseid, Apocalypse, the New Gods, and bringing together the DC universe like never before. One of the first things that we could learn from his artwork is his dynamism. The way that Kirby's panels were always bursting with energy and movement. You would never get bored from reading his books. So we're gonna have to learn how to integrate that within our...
Wait a minute, Namor started out with hot pants before he went to the Speedo? Huh. So he got more scantily clad over time. Interesting.
Our own work. You've got to learn to use the action lines, the speed lines, and all of the dynamic poses to create that excitement. He's always creating and contorting the figures in such a way that is reminiscent to the more modern creators such as Todd McFarlane's Spider-Man and all that, where he's literally contorting the body and the anatomy to better suit the image. It's all about hyper-stylization. Most people think that his work isn't exactly pretty, but it's definitely super fun to look at. Kirby...
I mean, his style was never meant to be pretty. It was supposed to be action-packed. I mean, yeah, there are some beautiful panels, and especially his abstract art can be beautiful, but his art style was not supposed to be pretty, as in pretty.
Kirby primarily does this by foreshortening and really just mastering perspective. He was a master of perspective, and he used it to create these dramatic and immersive scenes. So we have to learn to study perspective, right? He doesn't typically use actual perspective grid lines, but you could give an impressionistic kind of...
I'm getting some real big Will Eisner vibes from the Sandman title there.
Approach to the background designs. He was a master at creating mechanisms and technology that's never been seen before, and he would make it seem as though it were real and it was grounded in reality, but also in this fictitious otherworldly magic. And not only was he experimenting with visual designs, but he would create these very different comic book layout designs. He was constantly pushing the boundaries of the comic book design as a whole. So don't be afraid to experiment with new layouts, characters, and concepts. One of my favorite things that he ever did was in the early Fantastic Four, he would break down the story into different parts. Each part would have a new unique title, so it almost felt as though we were reading multiple books in one. Including in Thor, he would have a back bonus feature. After the 15 pages of the normal story, there would be an extra bonus 5 pages, and it would typically be better than the main book. It would be Tales from Asgard, this crazy otherworldly medieval kind of Norse god mythology that he would weave into these worlds. And that's definitely one of the things, is that he tells epic stories. Kirby's stories were often grand in scale, filled with cosmic battles and heroic figures, so we have to learn to craft epic narratives and capture that imagination.
That doesn't look quite like Kirby.
We have to learn to not only make something that's enjoyable for the reader, but we have to think in terms of making it enjoyable for us, because we're the ones who are creating it and drawing it. So if it fuels you, then it's going to fuel the reader. We have to create memorable characters. Kirby's characters were iconic and unforgettable, such as Captain America, Thor,
I think the best way to sum up, like, with what Kirby was doing, you really just gotta, especially if you're gonna make a superhero comic, you just gotta go balls to the walls with confidence and just sock the reader with what you got. Because yeah, a lot of superhero stuff looks very silly. A lot of their costumes are very silly. And at the end of the day, they are cheap entertainment. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't give it your all. And you just gotta come out swinging and wow the audience with what you got. And if that means you have to be over-exaggerated, you have to be melodramatic, or you have to be super dynamic, you gotta do it. You just gotta do it.
Iron Man, the Hulk, the Thing, the Fantastic Four. He would create the Galactus and the Silver Surfer. So you have to remember that you have to develop characters with unique personalities, backstories, and each have a visual design that's distinct from the last. The way that he would typically do this is the use of symbols.
Kirby art is the epitome of rule of cool. I was about to say that too, yeah. None of the tech made sense. Anatomy was distorted, but damn, it looked badass, yeah. Again, just balls to the wall. It's a fantasy story anyways, so you might as well just make it as cool as you can. Logic be damned.
Kirby was a master of symbolism, using visual elements to convey deeper meanings. Learn to incorporate symbolism into your storytelling. This goes into a deeper conversation and how he would harness the power of mythology. Kirby
also does.
He often drew inspiration from mythology and folklore. We would see this echoed later on by Mike Mignola, the creator of Hellboy. He would always go back and research and dig into the ancient mythology and folktale and fairy tales of the ancient olden world. He would weave that and bring that into his new stuff and make it feel like it's a brand new story that's never been seen before, because when we stylize them like Kirby did, we not only pay homage to the great storytellers of our own past, but we bring it in a new, fresh way to a brand new audience to learn the same lessons that were brought before us.
Yes and no, but it's also everything is based off of everything. There is no such thing as an original tale anymore. And it's like, why stress so much about being original when you could just take inspiration from what has been done before? It was like, not in the interview, but I was like shortly after the interview with RJ and John's Longbox, and I asked the two of them, what's the worst writing advice you have ever gotten? And it was RJ who said, be original, like, just make something completely original, and that's nearly impossible nowadays. So you kind of have no choice but to marry the old with the new, because you will never have an original idea. That sounds harsh, that sounds brutal, but it's the truth. Every story beat you can come up with, you got from somewhere else. Like, that's the reality of it. And I totally acknowledge that with my own writing as well. Like, hell, one of my short stories is called The Horror Muse. It's based off the muses in ancient Greece. So I fully acknowledge that none of my crap is entirely original.
Another great thing that Jack Kirby would do is that he would embrace exaggeration. Kirby wasn't afraid to exaggerate his characters and the settings for a dramatic effect. Ultimately, you're telling a story, you want it to be memorable, you want it to impact the reader. So we must learn to really use exaggeration to create these memorable and visually striking images. Something that Jack Kirby would often do is that he would collaborate with writers. Kirby would actually be one of the main artists that Stan Lee would work with. It would also be others like Steve Ditko, John Buscema, and all of these other great artists, but Kirby primarily focused on the panel layouts, the structuring, the pacing of the book. He would be the one who pencils it in its entirety, and he would allow Stan Lee to maybe fix the words that Kirby may have scribbled on the page. Stan Lee would not only embellish it with his own writing and his own amazing flair, but he would almost add more life to the image by giving it its praise.
Probably would have helped a little bit more for everyone involved if you would just freaking acknowledge his artists, but alright.
So, Kirby's success was often due to his collaborations with talented writers. So we must learn to work effectively with these writers to help create compelling stories. The most important thing is to never stop learning. Jack Kirby continued to evolve and experiment throughout his career. He would always strive to improve his skills and explore new techniques, and so should we. Jack Kirby started way in the early 50s, in the 30s, in the 40s with Captain America, when other smaller characters, the Blue Beetle, all of these things that were almost forgotten. He would later have the chance to bring them back to a modern age and retell them with Stan Lee within the Marvel comics. Before it was Atlas, before it was Timely, all of these characters were something that was in his mind. And if he had stayed the same artist, then you would not be talking about him to this day. His art has changed dramatically through the decades, and you could see the progression from his early work, how it was kind of more chaotic and confused, to his more renowned, more clean, more linear storytelling with multiple characters, multiple emotions, and dramatic settings, such as in The New Gods, which I think is his magnum opus. Kirby would somehow weave these magical ideas between the whole world of his books. Somehow he told one massive linear story from the beginning all the way to his passing, right? So he started off with the old gods, right? He would name them that later. It would be Thor and Odin and Loki and all of these characters within the Tales of Asgard. And he would always hint to something called Ragnarok, right? It was the Norse gods equivalent to the apocalypse, right? To Armageddon, right? To the end times. So he would always weave that in, and he would write about that within the early incarnations of Thor. And when he left Marvel and he went to DC, he not only brought those ideas in with him, but he grew them, he expanded them to a size that was not even understandable at the time. No one had done something like this before. We have to remember, everyone was doing just another, Superman fights a monkey.
I would disagree with that particular statement. But, I mean, yeah, it was a nice next step in his evolution. Yeah.
Or the Flash turns fat. That's what DC was doing at the time, right? Batman.
Oh, yeah. The issue where Flash turns fat, and then he has to, somehow how to figure out to lose all the weight. Which is okay, this is our story now.
I was fighting aliens, what? But Jack Kirby was making this new story, this fresh take, this continuation to his work, even though it was in another company. He would literally make the new gods this entire interwoven thing amongst 4 books, right? Or maybe technically even 5 books. Every single comic that he made, you could somehow connect it to his own, Jack Kirby universe, almost. He would expand on it with the Eternals. When he once he goes back into Marvel, he would make the Eternals, he would go in the Inhumans, and all of these characters that would really it felt like they were in the same world somehow, because they were all in his own mind. So don't be afraid, regardless of what book it is you're making, whether if it's for a client, whether if it's for a small thing that you're just kind of experimenting with. Try to see how it is that you could maybe connect all of them in an aesthetic way that resonates to the reader. And you instantaneously, once you see a Kirby page, all of the artists will tell you it's almost undeniable when you know it's Jack Kirby or not. You always know. He never inked most of his work, but you would still know whose work it was because his style was so vibrant, so different, so action.
It's so interesting that he never inked his own work. I get that they had different jobs for the different people. You had the penciler, you had the inker, you had the colorer. So I get that, but I find it very interesting that he never inked his own artwork.
Impact that you could always tell from a glance. So never forget to strive to make your own things come to reality, because it's you who are going to make and improve upon the past in order to inspire the future. Alright, this has been Ray Nat from Farlook Studios. Go hit the drawing table, go put the pencil on the page, and get some work done. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Peace out.
Alright, well, yeah, I think that was a pretty nice video. 4 months ago? Alright. We need to teach Gen Z about the Hays Codes. Oh my god, Gen Z's brains would explode if we talked about the Hays Codes or tried to talk to them about the history of the Hays Codes or even the Comics Code Authority. Their brains would explode. But we're about at the 2-hour mark there, and we're kind of out of time, so I'm going to go ahead and call it tonight. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you learned something about Jack Kirby. I hope I introduced you to some new materials for you to research about him. And I hope you got inspired by either what he has been saying or what other people have been talking about his artwork. But until we meet again, have a good